Talking all things SEC football with our good friend Jake Crain of Crain Company. Always a pleasure having Jake on the show. Jake, what's going on, man? Appreciate you taking the time.
Man, anytime I'm talking to you, obviously we're getting closer to college football kickoff, and look, my body's ready, Chris. It's I'm physically, mentally, emotionally, and spiritually ready for what's going to be an absolutely Looney Tunes year.
It is going to be crazy. And Jake, like you mentioned, I'm excited because these conversations between you and I will become more frequent, and that's how you know that kickoff is just around the corner. Jake, I was thinking about this morning. Can we talk about Georgia? I feel like I go through conversations. It's crazy, man. It's almost like we're at a point where we take Georgia for granted, and maybe that's just me. But like again, I'll have conversations with people. There's so many different storylines, right? With 12-team playoff. There's these teams on the verge of getting to 10 wins. There's the flashiness of what's happening in Oxford, Mississippi. Obviously, Texas and Oklahoma. There's so many other storylines in this. Like, there's just Georgia sitting there that we're almost just kind of, well, yeah, we know they're going to be good. And then we just don't talk about them. Let's spend a moment talking about Georgia. Your thoughts on Kirby Smart, the Bulldogs. They've got a lot to replace of Brock Bowers, Ladd McConkey. But I'm seeing a lot of people saying that, the schedule's brutal. Don't get me wrong, especially compared to some years past. It's a tough schedule. But to assume that Georgia is going to lose 2 games, I kind of feels like a bold assumption, and we're almost not giving Georgia enough credit. I mean, does that make sense? Like, I wanted to make Georgia the lead topic here because I go through too mmany conversations where we kind of just glance over the Bulldogs because they're just lather, rinse, repeat. They're going to be there.
Yeah, well, it kind of feels like they've replaced Alabama as the team we know is probably going to be the most dominant or has the best personnel and the best roster. And that's the biggest compliment that you can give somebody. I think, it's Georgia. They're going to be really damn good. They're going to be good everywhere. And that's what happens when you stack talented recruiting class on top of talented recruiting class. But look, I think 2 things can be true at once, right? I think this year, one of the main headlines coming out of SEC Media Days was I think there's more teams that have a chance to actually win the conference this year than since I can remember. I mean, you look at Georgia, you look at Texas, you look at Alabama, you look at Ole Miss, you look at Missouri. Somebody's always sneaky, which I think, is going to make for a fantastic football season. But at the end of the day, I still think Georgia has the best roster. And yeah, the schedule's brutal. Most of these schedules in the Southeastern Conference are, but if there's any team that is equipped to deal with the brutal schedule, it's Georgia. Not only from a what they return standpoint, but what they have behind the starters. You don't win games with your first 22 throughout a full season. You win it with your first 66. And Georgia can go through not catching some breaks on the injury front and still be okay. The funniest part about Georgia, and we've talked about this with Rusty Manziel, is their quote-unquote weakness, or maybe the most unproven part of their team, is the defensive line. Well, I'm here to tell you they're probably going to be really damn good, Chris. I mean, if that's, I guess every team has a, quote unquote weakness, but you take some of those athletes and put them on a different team, that may be the strength of the team. So look, Georgia should be the favorite in my opinion. But on the other hand, there are many teams I think this year within the conference that could end up winning it. So do I think it's crazy when people say that Georgia could lose 2 games? I don't. But I don't think it's very likely. And I think they're going to be one of the teams that's able to maneuver and navigate because of the growth of Carson Beck, because of the wide receivers they have on the outside. I think sometimes people forget, yes, they lost Ladd McConkey. Yes, they lost Brock Bowers. But they got Dominic Lovett. They got Ra Thomas. They got Oscar Delp. They got a tight end transfer, Urasek from Stanford. That's a pretty daggum good football player. So, I think that's perfect for Georgia. The more people that go against Georgia, the easier it is for Kirby Smart to manipulate adversity or put an extra chip on their shoulder. So, it's, some people, I guess, are quote unquote sleeping on Georgia, but I think that's the way Georgia wants it. And look, we don't make our predictions till the end of fall camp. I need to know who gets hurt, who wins what job, and who gets arrested. But it's going to be very hard for me not to pick Georgia, even though there are legitimately 5 teams, maybe even possibly 6, that could win this thing, especially since there's no divisions.
So, Jake, you mentioned the rest of the SEC. If Georgia, let's say, does not make it to the SEC championship, which sounds crazy, but there are people out there picking that. Our good friend Josh Pate has already gone on record and said that. I have Texas finishing first in the SEC because I do think they get the Dogs in Austin. I think that's their only blemish, but I do think that the Longhorns get them in Austin. But either way, if Georgia does not finish first, let's say they're not in the title game, is it just because the rest of the league is so damn good, or was there something you think that happened with Georgia? Was the defensive line not as good as we expected? Was it harder to replace Brock Bowers and Ladd McConkey than we gave credit? Like, what do you think went wrong, I guess you could say, for Georgia?
Well, I think the league is more loaded at the top. There's more teams at the top this year that you can't get away with not playing well, right? There's a lot of games, especially the past couple years, and we've seen them where Georgia can go out there and not play well and still win. Well, when you look at their schedule, there's more games or more landmines, as they call them, that Georgia has to go out there to play well and play well, whether that's on the road or whether that's at home. So I think that would be one reason. But I guess the second would be, and look, I talked with Carson Beck about this at media days, and he relied a lot on the center last year, a ton, Cedric Van Pratt. So now that he's gone, and Carson says he feels like he's ready to take the whole thing over, is there a couple instances where he doesn't get the protections right, or he calls something wrong and checks to something on the outside that ends up being a mistake? Because I don't think a lot of people realize a lot of playing quarterback is eliminating problems or options before the snap. And when you have a guy that can take care of the protections for you, it eliminates really what you have to look at. So now Carson's going to have to look at the whole picture, but I think he is ready. So again, does Georgia have to go out there and play their best game to beat everybody? No, but I feel like they have to play better more often to be able to get back to Atlanta. But the problem is, so do a lot of other teams. That's why, again, like I said, I don't make the final predictions until after fall camp, but I think there's a decent chance that Ole Miss could end up playing Georgia twice.
Jake, on that note, I feel like when you look at the SEC, not just this year, but every year, but I look at the SEC this year, and I feel like teams sort of fall into buckets for me in regards to tiers, right? Like tier one, and you can tell me if you agree or disagree. Tier one, I would put Georgia, Texas, Ole Miss. Would you go Ole Miss in tier one right now?
I would go Ole Miss.
And then there's a tier two. So of the teams in tier two, and I look at teams like Bama would be right there near tier one, but I'd put them in tier two right now. LSU, Tennessee, Missouri, some of these college football playoff hopefuls. Who do you feel like in tier two do you look at? Because you mentioned you think there's 5 or 6 teams that could win the SEC. Of the tier two teams, who do you think is most well equipped to make that jump and maybe be in the SEC championship game?
Well, I mean, the easy answer is Alabama there,
Right.
but I'll give you another one. I do think it's Missouri, and it's for a combination of things. Yes, they returned Brady Cook. Yes, they returned Luther Burden. They lost Schrader, but I think the offensive line is going to be fine. And even though the defense lost Blake Baker to LSU, I think there's some pieces there where they'll be good enough to be a balanced team. The schedule also really behooves Missouri. Really, when you look at Ole Miss and Missouri, they're borderline mirror images of each other outside of a couple different personnel groupings, mainly the front seven on defense. I think Ole Miss is better there, and that's the reason that Ole Miss is in tier one. But when you look at their schedules, they're very, very similar in where they're heavy and where they're light. When you look at their non-conference schedules, right, it's nothing crazy. And I think the depth that Missouri has added is going to help them down the stretch, because football is a battle of attrition. We all know that, as I mentioned earlier with Georgia, but most likely probably Alabama, because their personnel is still really damn good. I mean, I know there's been obviously a lot of changes there. Ryan Grubb, I think, going to the NFL is something that's not talked about enough with Kalen DeBoer's staff. Nick Sheridan's roommate of David Cohn, who's a co-host on Crain Company, and they have a lot of faith in him. But Ryan Grubb really helped make that thing go. So I would say, easy answer, Alabama. But if you really want to dig in and find a team, LSU still a question mark defensively in the front seven to me, which is amazing that I'm saying that. It is so weird for me to say that. It's like watching your mom kiss another man other than your father, just because I grew up watching LSU, and you're like, all right, we know they're going to be really good on defense. How many times is Les Miles going to toss to the running back and let the quarterback lead block? So I do think Missouri is really dangerous. Not that they have the best team or a top 3 roster, but they have enough pieces, enough confidence, and that schedule is very, very beneficial for them to be able to find a way to get there at the end.
Yeah, Jake, like you mentioned, when you start making predictions, you realize how much schedules matter when you go through the week to week, and it's a huge deal.
Yeah,
exactly. Jake, I appreciate you being willing to come on and talk with me even after I picked Arkansas to beat Auburn at Jordan-Hare. So let's talk about the Auburn Tigers. I got them at 7 wins, however you slice it up. It feels like, based off the responses I got, 8 wins is kind of that magic number in year 2. Would you agree? Like with what Auburn fans want to see in regards to forward progression, taking the next step, is 8 wins kind of that benchmark for Hugh Freeze this year?
I think it is. I think that's the number that would make Auburn fans say, yeah, that was a successful year. That's a number I think you can go into recruits' living rooms, because the last piece that Auburn needs, and it's obvious, is on the field success. You know, all of Auburn is aligned: the players, the coaches, the donors, the fans, the administration, and that really never happens. And when it does, good things happen. You look at being able to go into the living room of recruits and say, see, we told you on the field we were going to turn it around. It was just a matter of time. Now you can be part of that next class that gets us to double-digit wins, because I do think this is a bridge year into 2025 where Auburn should be good enough up front to really make a run. Now we'll see what they do at the quarterback position, you know, whether that be through high school development guys or guys in the transfer portal, who the hell knows. But when you look at the schedule as well and the non-conference, I mean, there's no reason Auburn shouldn't be 4-0 going into that week 5 game against Oklahoma at home. And I think that's one they could possibly win. So, you know, you go to Bama, you go to Georgia, you go to Missouri, and you go to Kentucky. You're probably winning 1 out of those 4. And it's not likely it's Bama, Missouri, or Georgia. So, you know, if you're able to, you know, run the table at home, which isn't going to be easy, but it's a lot more doable than splitting on the road, then you're sitting there at 9-3. So even if you drop a game at home, let's say to Texas A&M or to Oklahoma, or maybe even to Arkansas, Chris, which I don't see. I don't know if Sam
I'm embracing the hog, as Sam Pittman said.
Yeah, we'll see after the the Oklahoma State game if Sam Pittman's even there. But I think 8-4 is very, very doable with this roster, because I don't think people realize how thin Auburn was overall with what Hugh Freeze inherited after the Brian Harsin project went down in flames. So I think 8 wins is that benchmark. 8 wins will make you feel good, right? It'll make the sun shine a little brighter, the birds chirping a little louder, and it'll show real progress going into a year in 2025 where you get Bama at home, where you get Georgia at home, where the schedule still isn't unbelievably deadly across the board. So, yeah, I think 8-4 is very doable. When it comes to Arkansas, man, Bobby Petrino is a witch, but there's been a lot of coaches that are incredible play callers that looked really bad because they didn't have great players. And there's been a lot of really bad coaches that looked really good because they had great players. And it's sad, because I think Arkansas is worse, where Sam Pittman should be the best. And that's up front. That's on the offensive line. I don't think Green's a bad player, the quarterback they got him from Boise State. Hell, in the spring game, he threw the ball better than what I expected. But at the end of the day, if you're not good up front, I don't care if you run the air raid, the triple option, if it's the NFL, if it's Friday Night Tykes, or you got Bobby Petrino as the OC or Rick Weiss as the OC from Division III. It's not going to work if you don't have good enough players.
Jake, I know you had a lot of interactions at media days with Texas and Oklahoma folks alike, as did I. We all did. What were those interactions like in regards to expectations for both those programs, and how does it compare to your expectations for those programs? Obviously, Texas being looked at as a college football playoff favorite. They're going to challenge Georgia at the top. Oklahoma, a little bit different, and they're taking that personally, it feels like.
Yeah, well, just from a 30,000-foot view, I think it just solidified going out there and talking to people that represent those fan bases, whether it be fans or whether it be sports media members, that they're a perfect fit for the SEC, because they're as nuts as we are. They're absolutely as insane as we could walk them into the Shutter Island asylum with us, and we'd have a great time, which you have to be able to operate in these waters, unless you're Vanderbilt. And then we know the only reason you're here is that we can point and say, oh, hey, look, we care about school too. But as far as the two programs, they're in different spots going into year one. I think you got to put it into 2 buckets, right? You have the short term and the long term. Over a 5-year span, I think they're going to have about an even success mark, right? Some ups and downs through both of them. But going into year one, Texas is the better roster. They have an quote-unquote easier schedule. And Oklahoma's having to replace their whole offensive line and bring in a brand new quarterback who just has bowl game experience. So I think you'd be crazy when you do the math to sit here and say, well, I think Oklahoma's going to do better than Texas in year one. But over a 5-year span, I think Brent Venables and Sark, one's an offensive guy, one's a defensive guy, have toughened up those two programs up enough after Lincoln Riley, doing the same thing at USC that he did at Oklahoma. And then we know Texas before that. I mean, Sark kind of turned him from Club Med to Judge Dredd, which you have to be up front. I think they're prepared to be able to come in and make some noise down the stretch. Now, what I keep telling them, and again, when your expectations are so high, which they should be, it's hard to have anybody tell you, hey, just listen. You need to understand what you're getting into, is that don't fall in the trap of the common misconception that, the SEC is top heavy, or you just got to beat Bama, or you just got to beat Georgia. Well, yeah, you have to do that. But the hardest part of the SEC is the absolute meat grinder that is the whole schedule, right? Yeah, you got to play Bama, or yeah, you got to play Georgia. But then you got Ole Miss, right? And then you got LSU, or then you got Tennessee, or then you got to go to Kentucky. I mean, pretty much every environment that you're going to go on the road into is going to be incredibly hostile. There's going to be NFL players on the other roster that if they play well and you don't, they're going to be good enough to beat you. So it's a marathon, not a sprint. And I keep trying to get them to understand that, because even Nick Saban said it. And look, I coached college football for over a decade. You probably get your team in all three phases to play as well as possible 4, maybe 5 times a year. The question becomes those other 7 games when maybe you're not playing great on defense or you're not playing great on offense. Are you good enough to be able to survive those and win those games? And that's where it becomes the hardest in the Southeastern Conference. That's why what Nick Saban did is so damn impressive. That's why what Kirby Smart is doing is so damn impressive. Like, it's just so hard. And if you ask any SEC coach that, or really any coach that'll tell you the truth, they'll say the exact same thing. It's the journey, right? Not the landmark. That's what makes the SEC tough. And that's what you're going to find out. And that's not saying the Big 12 sucks. Nobody's saying that. But it's not the SEC. There's a reason you came over here, right? And it's not because it was easier. And I applaud you for that. Congratulations. Good. You want the smoke. Well, now you're about to get it, and we'll see how you can handle it. But I applaud you for wanting it. But again, don't fall. It's like Admiral Akbar on Star Wars. It's a trap. Don't fall for it. It's a trap. And then Texas has to go to Michigan week 2, which is just going to be a smush festival on both sides. I'm just trying to tell them honestly what I think. I mean, I don't get paid by any school. So it's not like I'm sitting here saying, well, I want Texas to do bad. No, I don't. I'm just telling you how this really is, like how life works over here.
Texas and Oklahoma both want the smoke, unlike Lincoln Riley, who's willing to sacrifice every rivalry to have an easy schedule.
Dog.
Can't even smoke. That is a fact. Cannot smoke a brisket. And don't post your brisket on Twitter either, because you think college football Twitter is bad. Jake, steak Twitter? Food
How
Twitter?
do your friends let that happen? Like, my friends would be like, dude, don't put that on the internet. Let's just eat it and like put it on a sandwich. Let's just eat it.
Jake, we're definitely going to have you on before week 1, so we'll talk about this matchup more. But Texas A&M hosting Notre Dame, night game at Kyle Field. How big is that one for Mike Elko and the Aggies? And I know, again, first game ever at Texas A&M, but there's still high expectations, man. Over-under's 8.5. And that feels like a big game.
And they're good enough to win that game and hit that over.
And Jake, I'll say this, talking to folks, that feels like a game that maybe if you're Missouri, LSU, like you want A&M to win that game to kind of knock Notre Dame off the track to the playoff, because that opens up a spot.
Yeah, that's what I was going to say. I mean, yeah, it's obviously huge for Mike Elko and Texas A&M. It's not make or break, because 1, it's not a conference game, and then number 2, Mike Elko still needs some time. But guys, Texas A&M's favored right now when you look at this at the sports books. I think Marcus Freeman is doing a good job of getting a different type of player at Notre Dame that can really compete at the highest level across the board, especially at the skill positions. But there's still a lot of questions about the outside, the guys on the perimeter at Notre Dame who were young last year. You did lose a couple. Riley Leonard's a really good player, but if anybody knows Riley Leonard's weakness, it's the guy who was the head coach at Duke, where Riley Leonard went, in Mike Elko. And A&M is good enough up front to be able to not only stalemate Notre Dame, but beat them. And honestly, if we're going to put Connor Wegman and Riley Leonard next to each other, there's actually a lot of similarities there. Now, Riley's game is a little more sexy because he can run better than Connor. But when you look at the numbers, I mean, Connor makes about as many good decisions as an Eagle Scout, man. I mean, the dude's not wrong. So when I look at A&M, I feel like the teams are pretty even, and A&M gets that home field advantage. You're almost kind of playing with house money because if you're Notre Dame, you're not in a conference. Like if you're going to get one of those at large spots, I mean, and yes, you play USC, right? Yeah, you look at Notre Dame's schedule. It doesn't get a whole hell of a lot easier. Typically, we make fun of Notre Dame because of their schedule. There's no making fun of them this year. It's an absolute gauntlet. So when I look at this, I feel like there's a lot more pressure on Notre Dame because of what it means for their postseason as opposed to A&M, to where, look, if you lose that game, you can still make the playoff as an at-large, or you can win the SEC and get that automatic bid. So, yeah, there's always pressure when you coach at places like A&M and Notre Dame. But I'm telling you right now, you're going to walk into a madhouse because A&M, they're feeling it, right? They're a little bit in their bag right now. Mike Elko's more of their flavor ice cream. We don't want the drama. We just want to block and tackle, and that's how it should be. So, again, it's I'm going to take the under probably right now because you got two defensive coaches, right? Which means when it comes down to the decision-making on fourth down or do we kick a field goal or do we go for it, they're probably going to be pretty conservative and really feel each other out at the beginning. So I think the under, I don't even know the number right now, but just like I'm probably going to take the over in LSU USC, I'm probably most likely going to take the under in A&M Notre Dame because it's going to be a, hey, you know, let me rub your shoulder. Oh man, you know, let me maybe go in for a kiss later. They're not going to go in and try and hit a triple right off the bat.
Jake, of all the things I'm excited to talk with you about this season, gambling certainly near the top of that list.
Oh,
we always have a good time beating the bookie. So,
dude,
Jake,
we were plus 64 units last year in college football as a group. Just absolutely robbed them. Just John Dillingered them. I don't want to jinx us because last year was an all-timer, but we're trying to stay hot over at Crain Company.
Let's stay hot indeed. Jake Crain, Crain Company, always a pleasure, Jake. Let's do it again soon.
You're the man, Chris. SEC Unfiltered.